When the voice cut through the stillness of the first-class cabin like a blade slicing open the air, every head turned in unison. The words landed soft but absolute, carrying the weight of a door closing on a conversation no one else had realized was already over. "I already said it. This is my seat." 2 sentences, 14 syllables, enough to freeze the entire cabin mid-breath. The Boeing 737 sat motionless at gate D-17, its engines quiet, its passengers trapped in the sudden gravity of a confrontation none of them had seen coming. Flight 271 from Dallas-Fort Worth to Chicago O'Hare had been scheduled to depart at 10:45 a.m. It was 10:43. The door was closed. The jet bridge had retracted. In 2 minutes, the plane should have been pushing back. Instead, the first-class cabin had become a stage. Marcus Bennett stood in the aisle, his shadow stretching across the navy blue carpet. 6 feet 1 inch of calm, athletic build that suggested a past life on a basketball court rather than behind a CEO's desk. The overhead lights washed over his face, brown skin, close-cropped hair, a jawline set in the kind of stillness that unnerved people more than anger ever could. He wore a gray Nike hoodie, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, faded Levi's jeans, white sneakers that had seen better days, a Patagonia backpack hung from one shoulder, the kind college students carried, not executives. His left wrist bore the only hint of anything beyond ordinary, a watch, mostly hidden beneath the hoodie's cuff, just the edge of its platinum case catching the light. 3 feet away, Rachel Morrison reclined in seat 1A as if the leather throne had been upholstered specifically for her lineage. She was 38, but carried herself with the practiced poise of someone who had learned early that beauty and status could open doors talent alone never would. Her blonde hair fell in a sharp bob cut, each strand precisely where her stylist had placed it that morning. A red Chanel blazer tailored to broadcast authority without effort. The Hermes Birkin bag occupying the space beside her cost $42,000, more than many Americans earned in a year. Her wrist bore a Cartier watch, her fingers 3 rings that sparkled under the cabin lights like tiny declarations of war. She held a champagne flute in her right hand, the glass catching the light as she lifted it to her lips without looking up. Marcus held his boarding pass in his right hand. Seat 1A, confirmed, paid in full. Printed 24 hours earlier when he'd checked in online, trying to shave minutes off an already tight schedule. The barcode was still crisp. The ink hadn't smudged. There was no ambiguity. Rachel finally glanced up, her eyes sweeping over Marcus the way a customs agent might examine a passport from a country known for forgery. The assessment took less than 2 seconds. Hoodie, jeans, backpack. Her gaze lingered on his sneakers for half a beat longer than necessary, then returned to her iPad as if the matter had been settled by visual inspection alone. "This section is not for people like you." The words fell into the cabin like stones dropped into still water, ripples expanding outward in concentric circles of shock. A woman in seat 3C stopped typing mid-sentence, her fingers hovering above her laptop keyboard. A man in 2B, tech investor Stephen Wallace, 43, wearing a Patagonia vest over a button-down, looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from casual boredom to sudden alertness. A college student in 4A, Katie Miller, 19 years old and flying home to Chicago for spring break, felt her stomach tighten the way it did when she witnessed something she knew would matter later. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice or his hand or anything that might give the confrontation the heat Rachel seemed to expect. Inside his chest, something heavier than anger settled into place, the profound exhaustion that builds after a lifetime of moments like this, each one a small cut that never quite heals before the next one opens. He had promised himself years ago that the next time someone tried to push him out of a space he had earned, paid for, legally claimed, he would not take a single step back. Today was that day. I booked seat 1A. I will sit in it. His voice carried the depth of someone used to being heard in boardrooms where millions of dollars shifted on the strength of a single presentation. No tremor, no pleading, just fact, delivered with the certainty of gravity. Rachel let out a short laugh, the sound sharp as glass breaking against tile. You're overreacting. It's just a seat. But everyone in first class understood this was not about a seat anymore. It was about boundaries, about assumptions carved so deep into the architecture of American life that they operated below conscious thought, invisible until someone refused to move. It was about the unspoken rule that some people belonged in certain spaces and others did not, and that the latter should know better than to challenge the former. The lead flight attendant appeared from the galley, her professional smile already in place before she fully understood what she was walking into. Jennifer Hayes was 36, blonde, 11 years with Skybridge Airlines. She had weathered turbulence over the Rockies, medical emergencies at 35,000 feet, and passengers who'd had too much to drink before boarding. She prided herself on de-escalation, on finding solutions that kept flights on schedule and complaints out of her file. She wore her navy blue uniform with the kind of precision that suggested military training, though she'd never served. Her name tag gleamed. Her smile, though practiced, was not unkind. Is everything okay here? Rachel turned to her with the relief of someone spotting a lifeguard while treading water. Jennifer, thank God. This man is harassing me. I just want to sit in my usual seat. Jennifer's eyes flicked to Marcus, then to the boarding pass in his hand. She stepped closer, her gaze scanning the barcode, the seat number, the confirmation code. Everything checked out. Legitimate purchase, valid ticket, no flags in the system. She looked up at Marcus, her smile tightening at the corners. Sir, your boarding pass is valid, but Mrs. Morrison is a long-time loyal passenger with us. Marcus waited. He had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than interruption. People revealed themselves when you let them finish their sentences. And we can offer you seat 2C. It's also a wonderful seat in first class, and we'll be happy to comp your drinks for the inconvenience. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge was burning. Inconvenience. As if the problem was his presence, not Rachel's occupation of a seat that did not belong to her. As if the solution was his displacement, not the correction of an error Rachel had created by sitting where she had no right to sit. No. One syllable, 2 letters, delivered with the finality of a vault door closing. Jennifer blinked. In 11 years, she had rarely encountered a passenger who refused an upgrade to a better seat. First class was first class. People didn't argue over 1A versus 2C when both came with the same legroom, the same priority service, the same warm nuts and complimentary cocktails. Rachel's voice rose half an octave, loud enough for the passengers in rows 2 and 3 to hear clearly. Are you seriously going to hold up the entire flight over a seat? Marcus looked at her directly for the first time since the confrontation began. His gaze was steady, unblinking, the kind of eye contact that made people uncomfortable because it refused to grant them the escape of looking away first. I'm going to sit in the seat I purchased. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. The calm was what unsettled Jennifer more than shouting would have. Anger she could manage. Company policy had scripts for anger. But this quiet, immovable certainty was something else. It was the stance of a man who knew exactly what was happening and had decided he would not be the one to bend.
The cabin had gone silent. Phones were rising in peripheral vision, small red lights blinking on as passengers activated their cameras. Katie Miller in 4A opened TikTok, her thumb hovering over the Go Live button. She hesitated for 3 seconds, then pressed it. The stream connected. 14 viewers appeared instantly. Friends, classmates, strangers scrolling through the algorithm's endless feed. From the cockpit, Captain David Thompson emerged.
58 years old, 35 years in the profession. A former Navy pilot who'd flown combat missions over the Persian Gulf before transitioning to commercial aviation. He had salt and pepper hair, deep lines around his eyes, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten in their seats. He wore his uniform with the authority of someone who'd spent decades being the final word on everything that happened inside an aircraft. 3 gold stripes on each shoulder, a cap he'd placed on his head before stepping into the cabin, a small ritual that signaled he was shifting into command mode. He moved down the aisle with measured steps, his shoes making soft thuds against the carpet. When he reached row 1, his eyes swept the scene in a single, practiced assessment. Marcus standing, Rachel seated, Jennifer hovering between them with an expression that broadcast discomfort louder than words.
"What's going on here?" His voice carried the low authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Not harsh, not loud, but weighted with the assumption that his presence alone would resolve whatever minor dispute had disrupted the orderly process of departure. Rachel sat up straighter, her performance shifting into a new register. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, not falling, just present enough to suggest vulnerability without sacrificing composure. "Captain, thank God you're here. This gentleman is causing a disturbance. I have severe anxiety. I always sit in this seat for my breathing exercises. It's the only way I can manage flights." She touched his arm lightly, a gesture so brief it could have been accidental, but David felt the implied intimacy of it, the suggestion that they were on the same side, that she was appealing to his protection against an unreasonable aggressor.
David turned to Marcus, his expression shifting into the paternal mode he adopted when dealing with passengers who didn't understand how things worked. "Sir, let me see your boarding pass." Marcus handed it over without hesitation. No fear, no trembling, no defensive posture. David examined it under the overhead light, his eyes moving from the barcode to the seat assignment to the passenger name. Everything matched. Legitimate purchase. Full fare, not an upgrade or a voucher. The system had assigned this seat to this passenger according to the rules David himself was supposed to enforce. But rules, David had learned over 3 decades, were tools, and tools could be used with discretion. "This is valid, but Mrs. Morrison is a Diamond Elite member. We try to accommodate our most loyal passengers when possible." He looked at Marcus with the expression of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child who kept insisting 2 + 2 = 5. "I'm sure you understand. We can move you to seat 2C. Very comfortable, spacious, all the same first-class benefits." Marcus heard the words beneath the words. He had heard them his entire life, in 1,000 variations, delivered with smiles and apologetic shrugs and the patient tone of people who believed they were being reasonable. "We can offer you something else. Wouldn't you prefer this instead? Surely you don't want to make a scene." Every version carried the same message. "You don't belong here, and everyone will be happier if you accept that quietly." Why should I leave a seat I purchased legitimately? The question landed cleanly, no anger behind it, just the simple logic of someone asking for an explanation that made sense. David's jaw tightened. He glanced around the cabin. Phones were out now, no longer subtle. The red lights multiplied. He hated being filmed, hated the way every interaction could become a viral moment, stripped of context, weaponized by people who didn't understand the complexity of managing 200 passengers with competing needs and expectations. "We're trying to find the best solution for all passengers. Not all, just one.
The correction was surgical. 4 words that stripped away the pretense and exposed the calculation underneath. David felt the shift in the cabin, the way the other passengers leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was happening. He had been flying for 35 years. He had landed planes with one engine out. He had talked down suicidal passengers and restrained violent drunks. He had evacuated an aircraft in under 90 seconds when smoke filled the cabin over Denver. But this quiet refusal from a man in a hoodie was something he didn't have a script for. "Mr. Bennett, we can resolve this quietly. If you continue refusing to cooperate, you may be asked to leave the flight." The threat hung in the air, official and final. David's hand rested on his belt, not quite touching the radio clipped there, but close enough to signal that he had options. Airport security was 3 minutes away. Federal air marshals monitored the terminals. The authority of a captain extended to removing passengers who posed a threat to the orderly operation of the aircraft. Rachel smiled, the expression small and satisfied. She had won. Of course she had won. She always won when it came to seats and upgrades and the small privileges that made travel tolerable. The system was designed to reward people like her, people who flew twice a week, who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on tickets, who knew gate agents by name and captains by reputation. People who understood that loyalty had value, and that value came with perks. But then Marcus did something that shifted the entire trajectory of what happened next. He looked directly at Captain David Thompson, his gaze steady and cold, and spoke with the kind of certainty that announced truth rather than threat. "Captain, you should choose carefully. Some decisions don't stay inside this cabin." David didn't like that line. It sounded like a challenge, possibly a threat. The kind of statement that, if this escalated to a formal complaint, could be used against the passenger to justify removal. Disruptive behavior, refusal to comply with crew instructions, intimidation of flight personnel. But something in Marcus's tone gave him pause. It wasn't the bluster of someone trying to sound important. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knew something David didn't. Rachel scoffed, loud enough for the passengers in row 3 to hear clearly. "Oh, please. Another person trying to make a fuss to get compensation. It's exhausting." Gasps rippled through the cabin, small, sharp intakes of breath from passengers who couldn't believe she'd just said that out loud. A woman in 3C whispered to her seatmate, the words barely audible but unmistakable in the shocked silence that followed. Stephen Wallace in 2B had been watching the entire exchange with a detached interest of someone accustomed to observing human behavior for profit. He was a tech investor, 43 years old, portfolio worth north of $200 million. He'd seen pitches from founders who projected confidence they didn't feel, watched CEOs bluff their way through earnings calls, learned to spot the difference between performance and substance. And something about Marcus, the stillness, the refusal to escalate, the complete absence of performative anger, registered as unusual. Then he noticed the watch. Marcus had shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other, and the movement caused his sleeve to ride up half an inch. The overhead light caught the edge of the watch face, just enough to reveal the distinctive complications, the platinum case, the craftsmanship that separated a timepiece from jewelry. Stephen's breath caught. He knew watches the way some people knew wine or art. He collected them, studied them, could identify a Patek Philippe from across a room by the curve of its lugs and the layout of its dial. And the watch on Marcus's wrist, partially hidden, deliberately understated, was a grand complication. Retail price somewhere north of $280,000. Used market value closer to $350,000, depending on the specific reference number and provenance. He pulled out his phone, zoomed in with the camera, snapped a photo before Marcus's sleeve fell back into place. The image was slightly blurry, but clear enough to confirm what he'd seen. He opened Twitter, typed quickly, his thumbs moving with the muscle memory of someone who posted dozens of times a day. They're trying to kick a guy with a $300,000 Patek Philippe out of first class on at Skybridge Air. Something is very, very wrong here. Flight 271 DFW to ORD, hashtag Skybridge. He hit send. The tweet posted at 10:44 a.m. Central Time. Within 30 seconds, it had 12 retweets. Within 2 minutes, 85. The algorithm detected engagement velocity and began pushing the tweet to users who'd never heard of Stephen Wallace, but who followed aviation news, social justice accounts, or had previously engaged with content about discrimination. But David didn't know that yet. He was still focused on the problem in front of him, a passenger refusing a reasonable accommodation, holding up a flight, creating a situation that could spiral into something worse if he didn't assert control immediately.
Mr. Bennett, this is your final decision. Either move to seat 2C, or you will be removed from this aircraft. The words came out harder than David intended, sharpened by frustration and the awareness that he was being filmed. He wanted this over, wanted the door closed and the plane moving, and the problem dissolved into the routine mechanics of a 2-hour flight to Chicago. Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when patience has stretched to its final millimeter. His eyes changed, not with anger, but with choice. A decision made. A line crossed. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie. David tensed. Jennifer took a half step back. Rachel's hand tightened on her champagne glass. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus ignored the command. His hand emerged, holding an iPhone, black case, recent model. He unlocked it with his thumbprint, the screen lighting up to reveal a home screen most passengers had never seen. Not the standard grid of apps. Something else. Something custom. He swiped 3 times, each movement deliberate, practiced. An icon appeared in the center of the screen, blue background, white text, a logo that made Jennifer's face go pale the instant she recognized it. Skybridge Executive Portal. The app most employees had heard of but never seen. The interface used by C-suite executives, board members, people with authority that extended beyond the usual hierarchy of captains and gate agents and customer service supervisors. The kind of access that bypassed normal channels and connected directly to systems most people didn't know existed. Marcus tapped the icon. The screen changed. A menu appeared, options listed in clean white text against the blue background. Emergency Operations Override, Flight Status Management, Executive Communications, Crisis Protocol Activation. He selected the first option. The screen shifted again, this time to a page that required authorization. 8 empty boxes waited for a code, Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Oh my God." Marcus entered the code without hesitation. 8 digits, typed from memory, no pause to check or verify. The screen flashed red. Text appeared in bold white letters. Flight hold activated. CEO authorization. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The cabin remained frozen, passengers holding their breath, David staring at the phone in Marcus's hand with an expression that hadn't yet caught up to what his eyes were seeing. Then David's radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, professional, delivering information without emotion or explanation. "Skybridge 271, this is DFW Tower. We have received an emergency hold order on your aircraft. Do not, repeat, do not proceed to taxi. Return to gate immediately. Acknowledge." David grabbed the radio from his belt, his hand moving on autopilot while his brain struggled to process what was happening. "Tower, this is Skybridge 271. Can you confirm who issued that order?" Static crackled for half a second before the response came back. "Order issued from executive level, Captain.
System shows CEO authorization. Return to gate. Acknowledge.
The radio slipped in David's grip. He caught it before it fell, but the fumble was visible, a crack in the composure he'd maintained for 35 years. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time, seeing past the hoodie and the jeans and the backpack to the man underneath. What the hell did you just do? Marcus sat down in seat 1A. The movement was smooth, unhurried, a simple return to the place that had belonged to him from the beginning. He placed his backpack on the floor, adjusted his seatbelt, and looked up at David with the same calm expression he'd worn since the confrontation began. I ordered this flight frozen.
He turned the phone screen toward the cabin, letting the passengers in rows 1 through 3 see the interface clearly. The blue background, the white text, the authorization code, and at the top of the screen, in letters that couldn't be misread or misunderstood, Chief Executive Officer Access, Marcus Bennett. Rachel's champagne glass slipped from her hand. It didn't shatter, the carpet caught it, the liquid spreading in a dark stain across the navy blue fibers, but the sound of it hitting the floor was loud enough to make 3 passengers jump. Marcus's voice remained level, each word delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much power each syllable carried. Marcus Bennett, CEO of TechCore Solutions, controlling shareholder of Skybridge Airlines, 34%. The cabin erupted in whispers and gasps. Phones rose higher, recording lights multiplying across the rows. Katie Miller's TikTok stream jumped from 14 viewers to over 800 in seconds, comments flooding faster than anyone could read. The aircraft jolted as the tug vehicle connected to its nose gear, the mechanical thunk reverberating through the fuselage like a judge's gavel striking wood. Outside the windows, ground crew in neon vests moved with practiced urgency, their gestures sharp and deliberate as they guided the Boeing 737 back toward gate D-17. The engines remained silent, the cabin lights stayed bright, and inside first class, 16 passengers sat frozen in a tableau of shock that hadn't yet evolved into comprehension. Rachel Morrison's face had drained of color, leaving her foundation stark against skin gone pale. The champagne stain spread across the carpet at her feet, dark and accusatory. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone, fingers slipping across the screen. She opened Instagram, then closed it. Opened her messages, scrolled without reading. Her breathing had gone shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that preceded either tears or rage, though which would arrive first remained unclear. Captain David Thompson stood motionless in the aisle, his radio hanging loose in his right hand. 35 years of flying had trained him to process emergencies with mechanical precision. Engine failure, cabin depressurization, hydraulic loss, electrical fire. He had checklists memorized for scenarios most pilots would never encounter in a lifetime of service. But this, a passenger freezing an entire aircraft with a phone app, existed outside every protocol he'd ever studied. The muscles in his jaw worked beneath the skin, grinding molars together as his mind cycled through options that all led to the same conclusion. He had threatened to remove a board member from an airline that board member partially owned. Jennifer Hayes had backed away until her shoulders pressed against the galley wall. Her professional smile had collapsed entirely, replaced by an expression of barely controlled panic. She'd worked for Skybridge for 11 years. She had seniority. She was 3 months from qualifying for the premium route assignments that would take her to London and Frankfurt instead of Chicago and Phoenix. And she had just, on camera, offered to relocate the company's controlling shareholder because a Diamond Elite member preferred his seat. The other passengers remained in their places, phones extended like offerings to invisible gods. Katie Miller's TikTok stream had climbed past 2,000 viewers. The comment section scrolled too fast to read individual messages, a blur of capital letters and emojis that registered as pure chaos given digital form. Stephen Wallace in 2B had already posted 3 follow-up tweets, each one adding context and speculation that fueled the fire spreading across social media.
Marcus sat in 1A with his seatbelt fastened, backpack stowed beneath the seat in front of him, hands folded in his lap. His expression hadn't changed. The same calm that had unsettled Jennifer earlier now seemed almost inhuman in its consistency, as if he'd rehearsed this exact sequence of events and was simply executing a plan laid out months in advance. His phone remained in his right hand, screen still displaying the executive portal interface, the red banner announcing "Flight Hold Activated," visible to anyone who glanced his direction. The plane rolled backward with the slow, careful momentum of a vehicle being handled by someone who understood its value down to the last rivet. Through the windows, passengers could see the terminal growing larger. Gate D-17 approached, its jet bridge extended like an accusatory finger pointing at the aircraft that had attempted to leave before settling its debts. David's radio crackled again, a different voice this time, higher pitched, carrying the tension of someone delivering news they didn't fully understand. "Captain Thompson, this is Ground Operations Supervisor Martinez. Be advised, executive team is assembling at gate. You're requested to remain on board until further notice." David pressed the transmit button, his thumb heavy against the plastic. "Copy that. Remaining on board." He released the button and looked at Marcus. The question he wanted to ask, "Who the hell are you really?" seemed both pointless and answered simultaneously. The phone screen provided one answer, the frozen aircraft provided another. But the why remained elusive, floating just beyond David's grasp like smoke from a fire he couldn't locate. Rachel finally found her voice, though it emerged thinner than before, stripped of the confidence that had armored every word she'd spoken since Marcus first approached row 1. "I didn't know." "How was I supposed to know?" Marcus turned his head toward her, the movement economical, precise. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence carried more weight than any response he could have offered. It was the silence of someone who had made a point and saw no reason to elaborate. The quiet of a teacher watching a student realize they'd failed a test they didn't know they were taking. Rachel's hands shook harder. She fumbled with her Birkin bag, pulled out her own phone, and stabbed at the screen with fingers that couldn't quite find their targets. She opened her messages, typed something, deleted it, typed again. Her Instagram notifications were climbing, 42, 67, 108, the numbers increasing faster than she could process. She swiped to see them, and her breath caught in her throat hard enough that the woman in 3C looked over with concern. The top notification was a direct message from someone she didn't follow, the preview text visible even without opening it. "You racist piece of..." She closed the app, opened Twitter. Her mentions were worse. Hundreds of them, the number climbing in real time. She'd been tagged in Stephen Wallace's tweet. Someone had screenshot Katie's live stream and posted it with the caption, "Skybridge Karen tries to steal black CEO's seat. Learns she effed with the wrong one." The tweet had 42,000 retweets. Her follower count was dropping. She watched it fall in real time. 38,247, 38,189, 37,954. The algorithm had turned against her, pushing her username into trending topics under a hashtag she didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from. Hashtag Skybridge Karen. The plane came to a complete stop.
The tug vehicle disconnected with another mechanical thunk. Through the windows, passengers could see the jet bridge extending toward the aircraft door, its accordion pleats expanding like an intake of breath. And at the gate, visible through the terminal windows, a cluster of people in business attire had assembled. 6 of them, then 8, then 12. Some held phones to their ears, others gestured with the sharp, agitated movements of people delivering or receiving very bad news. David's radio came alive again, this time with a voice he recognized. Karen Phillips, the station manager, a woman who'd worked DFW operations for 19 years and had a reputation for unflappable competence, even when 3 gates went down simultaneously during a thunderstorm. Her voice carried none of that composure now. "Captain Thompson, door release is authorized. Mr. Bennett is cleared to deplane. You and First Officer Hayes are to remain in the cockpit until the executive team boards." David acknowledged, then turned to Marcus. "Mr.
Bennett, you're free to leave the aircraft."
Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. The click of the metal releasing echoed louder than it should have in the silent cabin. He stood, retrieved his backpack, and adjusted the straps over his shoulders with movements that suggested he'd done this thousands of times before, which, given his apparent position, he probably had. He stepped into the aisle, and Jennifer pressed herself flatter against the galley wall to give him clearance he didn't technically need. As he passed Rachel, he paused. Not for long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough for her to look up, for their eyes to meet, for her to see in his expression something that made her throat constrict. "You didn't need to know who I am. Whoever I am, you owe every person their rightful respect." Then he continued toward the aircraft door, which a ground crew member was already opening from outside. The jet bridge stairs descended. Fresh air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and the distant tang of rain that hadn't fallen yet, but threatened from clouds gathering to the west. Marcus stepped off the aircraft and into a gauntlet. The terminal corridor between gate D-17 and the main concourse had transformed into something resembling a press conference, except no one had planned it and no one was in control. 47 people crowded the space, and the number was growing. Gate agents from neighboring counters had abandoned their posts. TSA officers stood at the periphery, unsure whether this constituted a security incident. Airport police had been called, but hadn't arrived yet. And in the center of the mass, phones extended like flowers turning toward the sun, were reporters. Not local stringers or bloggers hoping for content, real journalists. A crew from WFAA, the ABC affiliate in Dallas. A reporter from the Dallas Morning News. Someone from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. They'd been tipped off by the social media eruption, had scrambled crews from assignments across the Metroplex, and arrived with the predatory instinct of people who recognized a story that would lead the evening news. Camera lights ignited as Marcus appeared. Questions erupted in a cacophony that blended into meaningless noise. "Mr. Bennett, did you freeze the flight? Is this about racial discrimination? Are you planning to sue Skybridge? What do you want people to know? Will there be criminal charges?" Marcus stopped walking. The crowd quieted, sensing that silence would yield more than shouting. He stood in the center of the corridor, backpack over one shoulder, hoodie still in place, looking for all the world like someone who'd wandered into the wrong terminal, rather than a man who'd just halted commercial air traffic with a phone app. When he spoke, his voice carried the same calm authority it had held in the cabin, but amplified now by the terminal acoustics and the microphones thrust toward him. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I'm the CEO of TechCore Solutions and a controlling shareholder of Skybridge Airlines." Pens scratched across notebooks, phones recorded. The WFAA camera operator adjusted his frame to get a clean shot. 3 hours ago, I purchased a first-class ticket for this flight. Seat 1A. Confirmed reservation, paid in full. When I boarded, another passenger was occupying my seat. When I asked her to move, she told me this section wasn't for people like me. The reporters didn't gasp, they were professionals, but several exchanged glances that communicated the same information more quietly. The flight attendant offered me a different seat to accommodate the other passenger, who is a Diamond Elite member. The captain threatened to remove me from the aircraft if I didn't comply.
He paused, letting the words settle. I froze the flight because it was the only way to make leadership listen. And what I found in the process terrifies me. He shifted the backpack, pulled out a laptop, and opened it. The screen came to life, displaying a dashboard most of the assembled crowd had never seen. Rows of data, charts, numbers in red and green. The journalists leaned closer, camera zooming to capture the display. Skybridge Airlines has buried 2,147 discrimination complaints over the past 4 years. 78% of those complaints came from Black passengers. 97% were closed without resolution. Someone in the crowd, a reporter from the Dallas Morning News, let out a low whistle. This isn't about one seat. It's about a system that assumes people who look like me don't belong in spaces we've earned and paid for. It's about policies that prioritize elite status over civil rights. It's about leadership that chose to bury problems instead of solving them. He closed the laptop. This ends today. Then he walked away, ignoring the follow-up questions that chased him down the corridor. The executive team from Skybridge, now numbering 14 people, parted to let him pass, their expressions ranging from barely concealed panic to calculation to something that might have been respect mixed with fear. A woman in a tailored suit, 62 years old with steel gray hair, stepped forward as Marcus approached. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Patricia Nguyen, Senior Vice President of Communications. If we could have a moment to discuss." "Conference room, 20 minutes. He didn't slow down, didn't stop walking, forced Patricia to either follow or be left behind. She chose to follow, heels clicking against the tile as she struggled to match his pace. Behind them, the journalists were already filing reports, posting clips, sending alerts to editors who would interrupt regular programming to air breaking news about an airline discrimination scandal that had everything: hidden wealth, viral video, corporate malfeasance, and a protagonist who'd brought a commercial aircraft to its knees without raising his voice. Back on the plane, Rachel sat frozen in 1A, the seat that had started all of this. Jennifer had retreated to the galley where she was whispering urgently into a phone, her words inaudible, but her tone unmistakably desperate. Captain David had returned to the cockpit as instructed, where First Officer Sarah Ramirez sat with wide eyes and a question she didn't dare ask aloud. The other first-class passengers were deplaning now, a slow procession of people who would spend the next week telling friends and family about the morning they witnessed something they still didn't fully understand. Stephen Wallace paused at the door, looked back at Rachel, and shook his head before continuing into the terminal. The woman in 3C stopped beside Rachel's row. "You should be ashamed." Rachel didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Her phone buzzed continuously now, an endless vibration that felt like an insect trapped against her palm. She opened her work email and found 3 messages, all sent in the last 4 minutes. The subject lines were enough. Urgent social media incident. Call me immediately, Tom. Your video is everywhere. She opened the first one, from her boss, Tom Hendricks, VP of Marketing at the luxury fashion brand where she'd worked for 6 years. "Rachel, I'm seeing a video of you on a plane that's trending nationwide. We need to talk. Call me in the next 10 minutes or I'm escalating to legal." The timestamp showed the email had been sent 3 minutes ago. She had 7 minutes left. Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial.
The call connected on the first ring. Rachel? Tom's voice carried none of its usual warmth. They'd worked together for 6 years. She'd been promoted twice under his leadership. They'd had drinks after quarterly reviews, attended the same industry conferences, shared the kind of professional camaraderie that made 60-hour weeks tolerable. None of that warmth existed in the single syllable of her name. Tom, I can explain. Explain what exactly? Explain why there's a video of you telling a black passenger that first class isn't for people like him? Explain why you're trending on Twitter under the hashtag SkybridgeKaren? Explain why our brand is being tagged in posts calling for your termination? Her voice cracked. I didn't know he was... It doesn't matter who he is. It matters what you said. And what you said is creating a PR nightmare for a company that built its reputation on inclusivity. Tears started, hot and sudden, spilling down her cheeks and ruining the mascara she'd applied so carefully that morning in her bathroom mirror. Back when the biggest concern in her life was whether she'd packed the right shoes for the Chicago hotel. Tom, please. Legal is reviewing your contract. You'll receive formal notification within the hour. Don't come to the office. Don't contact clients. Don't post anything on social media. We'll have security pack your desk. The line went dead. Rachel sat in 1A with her phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence, feeling the architecture of her life collapse in real time. Her salary was $260,000 a year. Her apartment in uptown Dallas cost $4,000 a month. Her car payment, $900. The Birkin bag beside her had taken 3 years on a waiting list to acquire. She had a massage appointment tomorrow, a dinner reservation Saturday at a restaurant that required 2 months' notice, plane tickets to Tulum for next month that cost $6,000 and were non-refundable. All of it had been built on a foundation she'd never questioned until now, when it was crumbling beneath her feet. In the terminal, Marcus had reached the executive conference room, a glass-walled space near gate D15 that Skybridge used for VIP passengers and operational emergencies. 14 executives crowded inside, most still on their phones, their conversations overlapping into incomprehensible noise. Patricia stood near the door, her expression professional, but her eyes betraying the calculation happening behind them. Marcus set his laptop on the conference table, opened it, and connected to the room's presentation system. The wall-mounted screen came to life, displaying the same dashboard he'd shown the reporters, but with additional tabs and data sets that made Patricia's breath catch. The room quieted, phones lowered. 14 sets of eyes focused on Marcus, who remained standing while everyone else found seats, a small power dynamic that wasn't lost on anyone present. Before anyone speaks, I want to make one thing clear. His voice carried the same calm it had held all morning, but now there was an edge beneath it, sharp enough to cut. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm not here to accept apologies. I'm here to explain what's going to happen, and you're going to implement it. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. The CEO of Skybridge, Richard Hammond, 62, silver-haired, a career airline executive who'd spent 30 years climbing the industry ladder, leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, we had no idea you were on that flight. If you'd known, you would have treated me differently. That's the problem. Marcus clicked to the first slide. The data filled the screen, columns of numbers that represented human beings who'd been dismissed, ignored, categorized as noise in a system designed to prioritize revenue over justice. 2,147 complaints, filed by passengers who paid for tickets, who followed every rule, who did nothing wrong except exist in a body that someone else decided didn't belong. 78% of those complaints came from black passengers. 12% from Hispanic passengers, 6% from other minorities, 4% from white passengers reporting discrimination they witnessed against others. He let the numbers hang in the air. Resolution rate? 3%. 97% of these complaints were closed without investigation, marked as customer service issues, or simply deleted from the system entirely.
Harold Simmons, the general counsel, shifted in his seat. Marcus, those numbers lack context. Many complaints are frivolous, filed by passengers seeking compensation. Are you suggesting that 78% of black passengers who filed complaints were lying? The question landed like a hammer. Harold's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Marcus clicked to the next slide. An internal memo appeared, dated November 2020, marked confidential. This is from your VP of Operations, Michael Torres. Subject line: Customer Satisfaction Protocol Update. I'll read the relevant section. His finger traced the text on screen as he spoke. When Diamond, Elite, or Platinum members express concerns about seating proximity or passenger behavior, prioritize their comfort. Customer retention in premium tiers generates 73% of revenue, but resolution that negatively impacts Elite satisfaction should be escalated to regional management before action. He looked up. That's corporate policy, in writing. Telling your staff to prioritize Elite members over other passengers when complaints are filed. And when those complaints involve discrimination, when they involve Elite members who don't want to sit near passengers who don't look like them, your policy is to protect the Elite member. Patricia's pen had stopped moving across her notepad. Richard's face had gone pale. Where did you get that memo? Marcus smiled, the expression cold enough to lower the temperature in the room. I built your systems. I have administrative access to every database, every server, every backup. TechCore designed your passenger management platform, your complaint tracking system, your mobile app. You gave us root access for integration and troubleshooting. Did you forget that when you signed the contract? The room went silent. Somewhere outside, an announcement echoed through the terminal, calling passengers to a gate for boarding. Inside the conference room, 14 people confronted the reality that the man they'd just witnessed freeze a commercial aircraft had access to information they'd believed was secure. Marcus clicked to the next slide. Video footage appeared, security camera angles from various skybridge gates across the country. Each clip showed the same pattern: black passengers being questioned about tickets, asked for additional identification, relocated from seats they'd booked, escorted away by security for behavior that white passengers in adjacent rows exhibited without consequence. I pulled these from the past 6 months. 47 incidents, all captured on your own security cameras, all creating documentation that you chose not to review when complaints were filed. Patricia finally found her voice. What do you want, Marcus? The question was direct, stripped of pretense, delivered by someone who recognized they were negotiating from a position of complete weakness. Implementation of transparency protocol within 30 days. Every discrimination complaint logged in an immutable blockchain ledger. AI monitoring of all crew passenger interactions, flagging biased language in real time. Public dashboard showing complaint volume, resolution rates, and demographic data, updated monthly. Zero tolerance policy for crew and staff who violate civil rights, with immediate termination. Third-party audit of all complaints filed in the past 4 years, with compensation for victims whose cases were improperly closed. He paused. And everyone involved in today's incident is terminated. The flight attendant who tried to move me, the captain who threatened to remove me, the gate agent who questioned my ticket this morning, every executive who created or enforced the policies that enabled this. Richard's hands flattened on the table. Marcus, that's career suicide for people who were following company policy, wrong policy, your policy, which you're changing today,
or I release everything I just showed you to the media waiting outside, sell my 34% stake to whichever competitor offers the best price, and terminate TechCore's contract, which will shut down your booking system in 72 hours. The threat hung in the air, precise and devastating. Skybridge operated 700 flights daily, 30 million passengers annually, revenue of $12 billion last year. All of it dependent on systems that TechCore maintained under a contract that included termination clauses Marcus had personally negotiated. Patricia looked at Richard. Richard looked at Harold. Harold looked at his hands, clearly running through legal options that didn't exist. Richard exhaled slowly.
How long do we have to respond? Marcus checked his watch. The Patek Philippe that had started this entire cascade. Its platinum case catching the light. Its complications displaying information only people who understood true craftsmanship would appreciate. My daughter expects me home for dinner. I'm making pancakes. So you have until I reach the rental car counter to agree. Or I make a call that ends this company. He closed the laptop, picked up his backpack, and walked out of the conference room, leaving 14 executives in silence behind him. The rental car counter at Dallas-Fort Worth sat in Terminal A, a 20-minute walk from gate D17, through corridors that smelled of Cinnabon and jet fuel, and the particular anxiety that permeated airports at mid-morning.
Marcus walked the distance with the same unhurried pace he'd maintained all morning, backpack over one shoulder, phone in hand, checking messages that had accumulated while he'd been freezing aircraft and dismantling corporate policies. 47 texts from COO Sarah Williams, each one escalating in urgency. Marcus, what's happening? CNN is calling, stock is falling, Bloomberg wants comment. Marcus, please respond. 15 missed calls from the same number, 6 voicemails he didn't bother listening to, 3 emails from TechCore's legal team with subject lines that screamed emergency, and 1 text from a number not saved in his contacts sent 4 minutes ago. This is Richard Hammond. We accept your terms. All of them. Meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. Chicago HQ to formalize. Please don't terminate the contract. Marcus stopped walking.
Passengers flowed around him like water around a stone, rolling suitcases clicking against tile, children crying, gate agents announcing final boarding calls for flights that would depart on time because their passengers hadn't challenged assumptions about who belonged where. He read the message twice, then typed a response with thumbs that moved with deliberate precision. Good. Jennifer Hayes, Captain David Thompson, Gate Agent Sarah Whitfield. Terminations effective immediately. VP. Michael Torres resignation by end of business today. Transparency protocol implementation begins Monday. I'll review progress reports weekly. He hit send, then blocked the number. Richard could communicate through official channels from now on. The personal access was revoked, the relationship redefined from whatever collegial pretense had existed before to something purely transactional. The phone buzzed again immediately. Sarah Williams calling. Marcus answered. I'm fine. Her voice came through sharp with relief and residual panic. Marcus, thank God. What happened? The board is losing their minds. Stock dropped 11%. CNBC ran a breaking news banner. Your name is trending on Twitter above the president. He resumed walking, phone to ear, navigating through a cluster of tourists who'd stopped in the middle of the corridor to consult a terminal map. Handled it. Flight got frozen, made some points. They accepted terms. Marcus, you can't just... You froze a commercial aircraft. The FAA is going to investigate. The media is calling it the biggest airline discrimination scandal since that doctor got dragged off United. We need crisis management. We need PR. We need nothing. I'm coming back to Dallas tonight. Meeting at 8 tomorrow morning. Have the transparency protocol specs ready for review. You're going to Chicago for the board meeting? No. Canceled it. They can wait. Silence stretched across the line for 3 seconds while Sarah processed information that contradicted everything she knew about Marcus's obsessive commitment to stakeholder management and fiduciary responsibility. You canceled a board meeting? Marcus, that's a $200 million integration project. They need your sign-off on the timeline adjustments. They needed it yesterday. Today they need to learn that discrimination has consequences more important than timelines. He hung up before she could respond, slipped the phone into his hoodie pocket, and continued toward Terminal A. The walk gave him time to think, to process the cascade of events that had started with a simple assertion, "This is my seat," and culminated in corporate restructuring delivered via text message while walking past a Starbucks where passengers queued for overpriced lattes. A life spent building companies had taught Marcus that power operated on multiple frequencies. There was the obvious power of wealth and position, the kind that let you freeze aircraft and terminate executives. But beneath that ran deeper currents, the power of preparation, of knowing systems better than the people who thought they controlled them, of staying calm when everyone else was panicking. His mother had taught him that power before cancer took her 5 years ago, before she died in a hospital room with Marcus holding her hand and promising he'd never let anyone make him feel small. The promise had seemed abstract then, a comfort offered to a dying woman who'd spent 63 years cleaning other people's hospitals and offices and homes. But standing in that cabin this morning, with Rachel Morrison looking at him like he was dirt tracked onto expensive carpet, the promise had crystallized into something concrete and actionable. He reached the rental car counter where a young man in a burgundy polo shirt looked up from his computer screen with the professional smile of someone whose shift had 6 hours left to run. Welcome to Enterprise. Name for the reservation? Marcus Bennett. Fingers clicked across a keyboard. The smile faltered slightly. Recognition, though whether from news alerts or social media or the algorithmic currents that pushed viral content to phones across America, Marcus couldn't tell and didn't care. Yes, sir, Mr. Bennett. We have you in a full-size sedan returning tomorrow. Is that still correct? Correct. I'll just need your driver's license and credit card. Marcus pulled his wallet from his back pocket, extracted both cards, and handed them over. The young man, name tag read Derek, processed them with movements that had become slightly less smooth, slightly more nervous. His eyes kept flicking up to Marcus's face, then back to the screen, as if trying to reconcile the man in the hoodie with whatever information was scrolling through his newsfeed. You're all set, Mr. Bennett. Silver Camry in space B47. Keys are in the vehicle. Thank you. Marcus took his cards back and headed for the parking garage, following signs that promised ground transportation through tunnels that echoed with footsteps and the distant rumble of shuttle buses. He found the Camry where Derek had promised, unlocked it with a key fob, tossed his backpack onto the passenger seat, and sat in the driver's position without starting the engine. His phone showed 11:47 a.m. Emma would be at school until 3:30, which meant Mrs. Patterson wouldn't expect him for another 4 hours. He'd told his daughter he'd be home by dinner, had promised pancakes, had kissed her forehead this morning while she ate cereal, and reminded him to bring back a snow globe from Chicago because she collected them and had 17 lined up on her bookshelf. He wasn't going to Chicago now. Wasn't going to sit in a boardroom and smile through presentations about integration timelines and user acceptance testing, while somewhere in America another black passenger was being told that first class wasn't for people like them. Instead, he pulled out his laptop, connected to the airport's Wi-Fi, and logged into TechCore's secure server. The transparency protocol existed as a concept he'd drafted 3 months ago, after reading about another airline incident, another viral video, Another cycle of outrage that would fade in a week when the next controversy captured America's fractured attention span. He'd never thought he'd implement it.
Never imagined he'd have the leverage to force its adoption. The file opened. 83 pages of technical specifications, database schemas, API documentation, blockchain integration protocols, machine learning models trained to detect biased language patterns. Sarah and her team had assumed it was speculative work, something Marcus was exploring for potential future clients. They didn't know he'd been building it specifically for Skybridge, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. That moment had arrived at 10:43 a.m. in seat 1A. He opened a new terminal window and SSH'd into TechCore's development server. Code scrolled past, green text on black background, the language of systems and logic and rules that couldn't be bent by tears or excuses or claims of ignorance. He began typing, fingers moving across the keyboard with muscle memory built from 20 years of writing software that made airplanes fly and packages deliver and money move between banks. An hour passed, then another. The Camry's interior grew warm from sunlight streaming through the windshield. Marcus adjusted the air conditioning, connected his phone's hotspot for better bandwidth, and continued working. Around him, the parking garage filled and emptied in rhythm with arriving and departing flights, passengers coming and going with luggage and children, and the exhausted expressions of people navigating American transit infrastructure. At 2:15 p.m., his phone buzzed with a call from a Dallas area code he didn't recognize. He ignored it. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. Same number. He answered on the fourth ring. Marcus Bennett. Mr. Bennett, this is Amanda Richardson from WFAA News. We spoke briefly at the terminal earlier. I was hoping to schedule an interview about the Skybridge incident. Not interested. Sir, with respect, this story is already national news. CNN, MS, NBC, Fox, they're all covering it. You have an opportunity to control the narrative. Marcus's fingers paused over the keyboard. The narrative is already controlled. 2,147 buried complaints. 78% from black passengers. 97% unresolved. Those numbers don't need commentary. But your personal story, the single father, the CEO who built a company from nothing, the man who stood up when he could have stayed silent, that's powerful. People need to hear it. Something in her tone caught his attention. Not the aggressive hunting of a journalist chasing clicks, but something more measured, intentional. Why? The question seemed to surprise her. A pause stretched across the line. Because most people don't have the power you have. They get removed from planes and it ends there. They file complaints that disappear. They accept lesser seats because fighting means missing flights and losing jobs. But you didn't. And that matters. Marcus considered this. The journalist was right, though her motivations remained suspect. Stories shaped perception, and perception shaped behavior. A data dump would resonate with policy analysts and civil rights attorneys, but it wouldn't reach the people who needed to understand why discrimination persisted in systems designed to be colorblind. One interview, tomorrow, 2 p.m. at TechCore headquarters, 30 minutes maximum. You bring one camera operator, no one else. Deal. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. He hung up and returned to his code, but the interruption had shifted something in his focus. The technical implementation of transparency protocol would prevent future incidents, would create accountability where none existed, would force airlines to confront patterns they'd spent decades pretending not to see. But it wouldn't address the deeper current, the assumptions that made people like Rachel Morrison look at someone in a hoodie and conclude they didn't belong. That required something else, something more personal. Marcus closed his laptop, started the Camry,
and drove out of the parking garage into afternoon traffic that moved with the sluggish inevitability of concrete and frustration. The GPS directed him toward Interstate 35, but he ignored it, taking surface streets through Irving and into Dallas proper, navigating by memory toward Emma's school in Highland Park. St. Mark's Academy occupied 12 acres of manicured lawn and brick buildings designed to resemble an East Coast prep school transplanted to Texas. Emma had enrolled 3 years ago after Michelle died, after Marcus had sold their house in Austin and moved to Dallas to be closer to Tech Corps' headquarters, after he'd decided that stability mattered more than the disruption of changing schools mid-semester. She'd thrived there, made friends, joined the soccer team, brought home report cards that warranted placement on the refrigerator beneath alphabet magnets she'd arranged to spell "Daddy is the best." And every afternoon at 3:30, she emerged from the front doors with her purple backpack and her lunchbox decorated with stickers, and her smile that made every difficult decision Marcus had ever made feel justified. He arrived at 3:22 p.m. and parked in the pickup lane where parents idled in luxury SUVs that cost more than some Americans earned in 5 years. A Mercedes S-Class, a Range Rover, a Tesla Model X with Falcon wing doors. And Marcus in a rental Camry, still wearing the hoodie that had started everything, watching the school doors for his daughter. She appeared at 3:31, purple backpack bouncing, dark hair in 2 braids that Mrs. Patterson had woven that morning before school. Her face lit up when she spotted the Camry, confusion flickering for half a second before recognition set in. Marcus wasn't supposed to pick her up. Mrs. Patterson handled school duties. His presence meant something had changed, though Emma was 9 and hadn't yet learned to interpret deviations from routine as potential problems. She climbed into the back seat. Marcus had installed the booster that morning before leaving for the airport, some unconscious preparation for a contingency he hadn't consciously planned for, and buckled herself in with practiced efficiency. "Daddy, you're back early? Did you bring me a snow globe?" Marcus looked at her through the rearview mirror, at the gap-toothed smile and the excitement that assumed the world was fundamentally safe and fair and organized around making 9-year-olds happy. "Didn't make it to Chicago, sweetheart. Something happened." Her smile faltered. "Are you okay?" The question carried weight beyond its simple construction. Emma had lost her mother 3 years ago. She understood that adults could disappear, that promises about coming home for dinner weren't guarantees, that sometimes the world broke in ways that required new arrangements. "I'm fine. Better than fine. But we need to talk." He pulled out of the pickup lane and headed toward home, taking the long route through Highland Park's tree-lined streets where houses cost millions and lawns were maintained by crews who arrived in trucks before dawn. Emma swung her legs in the back seat, untied and retied her shoe, waited with the patience of a child who'd learned that Daddy's serious voice meant important things were coming. They reached the house, a 4-bedroom colonial that Marcus had bought for cash 2 years ago, overpaying by 30% because he'd wanted the deal closed before Emma's school year started, and went inside. Emma dropped her backpack by the door, a habit Marcus had given up trying to correct. He led her to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of orange juice, and sat across from her at the table where they ate breakfast every morning and dinner every night, and did homework under the pendant light that hung from the ceiling. "Something happened on my flight this morning." Emma's eyes widened. "Like a crash?" "No, baby, nothing dangerous, but something important." He told her the story, editing it for a 9-year-old's comprehension, stripping away the corporate complexity and viral media and stock price implications. He told her about the seat, about Rachel, about the captain who'd threatened to remove him. He didn't tell her about the watch, or the executive portal, or the 2,000 buried complaints. That would come later, when she was older,
when she could understand systems instead of just events.
The lady said first class wasn't for people like you? The question emerged tentative, as if Emma was testing whether she'd understood correctly or had misheard something crucial. Yes. What did she mean? Marcus had known this question was coming, had rehearsed various answers during the drive from the airport, had tried to find words that would explain racism to a child who attended a school where diversity meant the admission of 3 black students per grade level, and cultural awareness was taught through units on Kwanzaa. She meant people who look like me. People with dark skin. Emma's face scrunched with confusion. But you're rich. You own companies. You're on TV sometimes. The logic was perfect for a 9-year-old who'd grown up in a house with more rooms than people, who'd never gone hungry or worried about rent or experienced the 1,000 small indignities that accumulated into the weight Marcus carried. To Emma, her father was invincible, rich, powerful, protected by wealth from the things that hurt other people. Money doesn't change how people see you when they don't know who you are. That lady looked at my hoodie and my backpack and decided I didn't belong. She didn't ask questions, she just assumed. That's not fair. No, it's not. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing information that contradicted the just world hypothesis every child constructed to make sense of existence. Good people were rewarded, bad people were punished. Rules applied equally. The universe operated on logic. What did you do? I stood up for myself. I used the power I have to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. This she understood. Emma had watched enough superhero movies to grasp the basic framework. Someone with power using it to protect people who didn't have power. The details were different, but the archetype resonated. Like Iron Man? Marcus smiled despite himself. Something like that. Good. I'm glad you didn't move. That lady was mean. She hopped down from her chair, apparently satisfied that the world still made sense, that Daddy was still Daddy, that justice had been served, and therefore pancakes could proceed as scheduled. She pulled the Bisquick from the pantry, retrieved eggs from the refrigerator, found the griddle in the cabinet beneath the stove. The ritual of pancakes commenced, familiar and grounding, returning them both to the comfortable rhythms of life that existed outside viral videos and corporate restructuring. Marcus helped her measure ingredients, watching her small hands work the measuring cups with exaggerated care, determined not to spill. They mixed batter, heated the griddle, poured circles that bubbled and browned. Emma flipped them with the confidence of someone who'd done this dozens of times, who'd learned from Michelle before cancer had stolen her, and from Marcus afterward, when cooking had become one of the ways he showed love in the absence of the person who'd taught him how. They ate at the kitchen table with syrup and butter and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need conversation to fill space. Emma told him about school, about the math test she'd aced, about the girl who'd pushed her on the playground and gotten sent to the principal's office, about the book report due Friday on a biography she'd chosen about Harriet Tubman. Mrs. Chen says Harriet Tubman was brave because she helped slaves escape even though it was dangerous. Marcus nodded, swallowing a bite of pancake. That's right. Were you brave today? Like Harriet Tubman? The comparison seemed absurd, standing up for a first-class seat equated with the Underground Railroad. But Emma's logic was sound. Both involved challenging systems. Both carried risk. Both required refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. I don't know if it was brave, but it was necessary. This seemed to satisfy her. She finished her pancakes, carried her plate to the sink, and disappeared upstairs to her room, where she'd spend the next hour doing homework at her desk beneath posters of soccer players and boy bands and the periodic table she'd insisted on hanging because science was her favorite subject. Marcus cleaned the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with the methodical attention he applied to everything, making sure each plate was positioned for optimal water coverage, each fork placed tines up in the utensil basket. His phone buzzed continuously through the process, texts, calls, email notifications, but he ignored them all.
Whatever fires were burning at TechCore or Skybridge or in the comment sections of social media could wait. At 7 p.m., after Emma had finished homework and they'd watched an episode of a sitcom she liked, after he'd tucked her into bed and read 3 chapters of the book on her nightstand, after she'd fallen asleep with her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest, Marcus retreated to his home office. The room occupied the back corner of the house, overlooking a backyard where a swing set stood unused since Emma had aged out of it 2 years ago. Built-in shelves held books on software architecture, business strategy, leadership, and a section devoted to Black history that Michelle had started and Marcus had continued adding to after her death. His desk faced the window, 3 monitors arranged in a curve that put Bloomberg terminals and development environments and communication platforms within easy reach. He logged into Twitter for the first time since the incident. The notifications had climbed past 10,000. His follower count had jumped from 800, mostly tech industry connections and TechCore employees, to 42,000. The trending topics sidebar showed hashtag SkybridgeKaren in 3rd place, below a political scandal and above a celebrity divorce. He clicked the hashtag and scrolled through the deluge. Video clips from Katie's livestream, reposted and remixed and edited into compilations. Screenshots of Stephen Wallace's tweets. News articles from CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, The New York Times, Washington Post, Dallas Morning News, Chicago Tribune. Think pieces about airline discrimination. Threads analyzing Skybridge's stock price. Memes of Rachel's face photoshopped onto various Karen stereotypes. And then, deeper in the feed, posts from people Marcus had never met sharing their own stories. I was removed from first class last year for acting suspicious. I was reading a book. Delta agent made me prove my ticket was real 3 times. White passengers behind me walked right through. United flight attendant told my daughter she was too young for first class. She's a medical resident flying to a conference she paid for herself. The stories accumulated, hundreds of them, each one a data point in a pattern that everyone seemed to know existed, but that airlines had successfully avoided addressing through decades of careful PR and legal settlements that included NDAs. Marcus opened a new document and began typing. Not code this time, words. A statement he'd post tomorrow after the WFAA interview, something that would provide context beyond the viral clips and hot takes. What happened to me this morning happens to countless people every day. The only difference is that I had the power to freeze a flight and demand accountability. Most people don't. They accept the lesser seat, file complaints that disappear, swallow their dignity because fighting means missing connections and losing jobs. This isn't about me. It's about the thousands of passengers who've been judged by appearance instead of the validity of their tickets. It's about systems designed to prioritize elite status over civil rights. It's about leadership that chose comfort over justice. I froze that flight because I could. Because I spent 20 years building a company that gave me leverage. Because my daughter needs to grow up in a world where her father doesn't accept being treated as less than human. But the real work begins now. Transparency Protocol will force airlines to confront patterns they've ignored. Blockchain-verified complaint tracking. AI monitoring of crew interactions. Public dashboards showing who gets questioned, who gets relocated, who gets removed. No more buried data. No more plausible deniability. Some will say this is too extreme, that mistakes happen, that most crew members are good people doing difficult jobs. And they're right. But good people participating in bad systems create injustice just as surely as malicious actors. The flight attendant who offered me a different seat wasn't evil. She was following policies that treated elite status as more important than equality. The captain who threatened to remove me wasn't a bigot. He was enforcing priorities that valued schedule adherence over passenger rights. The system failed. And when systems fail, they must be rebuilt. He saved the document, scheduled it to post at 2 p.m. tomorrow after the WFAA interview, and turned his attention to the Transparency Protocol implementation timeline. Sarah had sent over preliminary specs at 6 p.m. The team had worked through dinner, apparently recognizing that this project had shifted from speculative to critical overnight. The technical architecture was sound: database schemas for logging complaints, API endpoints for crew reporting, machine learning models pre-trained on bias detection.
The blockchain integration would take longest. Immutable ledgers required careful implementation to prevent errors that couldn't be corrected. But 3 months was achievable if they dedicated resources. An email arrived from Richard Hammond at 8:47 p.m. Marcus, board met in emergency session. Unanimous approval for Transparency Protocol implementation. Budget approved. $47 million over 3 years. Timeline: full deployment within 90 days. Pilot program begins Monday. Terminations executed as requested. Jennifer Hayes, David Thompson, Sarah Whitfield, all released with severance packages contingent on NDAs. Michael Torres resigned. Replacements identified from diversity-focused recruitment. FAA investigation opened this afternoon. Our cooperation will be complete. Legal expects resolution within 60 days with no findings against company. Stock closed down 8.4%, but analyst reports are surprisingly positive. Market sees this as painful but necessary reform. Morgan Stanley upgraded us to buy based on expected reputation recovery. Press conference scheduled Friday to announce changes. Would appreciate your participation but understand if you decline. One more thing. I'm sorry. Not because you're a shareholder or because this became public. I'm sorry because it happened at all. Because we built systems that enabled it. Because we were comfortable enough not to notice until someone made us look. Richard Marcus read the email twice. The apology felt genuine, though whether it stemmed from actual remorse or careful PR coaching was impossible to determine. Either way, it didn't matter. Richard's feelings were irrelevant. The structural changes were what mattered, the concrete alterations to systems and policies that would persist long after emotions faded. He composed a brief response. Richard. Acknowledged. I'll attend Friday press conference via video. Emma has a soccer game I won't miss. Transparency Protocol deployment timeline is aggressive but achievable. Sarah Williams at TechCore will coordinate with your IT team. Weekly progress reports required. One clarification. The apology I need isn't directed at me. It's owed to the 2,000 passengers whose complaints were buried, whose dignity was dismissed, whose experiences were categorized as noise instead of signal. They're the ones who deserve your contrition. Marcus. He hit send and closed his laptop. The day had stretched beyond normal boundaries, compressing events that should have taken weeks into hours, forcing decisions that would ripple through an industry that operated on inertia and quarterly earnings reports. His phone buzzed one final time, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Angela Roberts. We've never met, but in 2020 I was removed from a Skybridge first-class seat for making a loud phone call. I was coordinating emergency surgery for a patient in critical condition. The white passenger next to me had been on his phone for 20 minutes before I made mine. No one said anything to him. I filed a complaint. It was closed without investigation. I stopped flying Skybridge entirely. I saw the news today. I saw what you did. I wanted to say thank you. Not because you're rich or powerful, but because you didn't let them make you small. Because you used your platform to expose something the rest of us could only whisper about. I'm a trauma surgeon. I save lives. But on that flight, I was treated like a problem to be solved. You changed that today. For me, and for everyone who comes after. Thank you. Marcus read the message 3 times, feeling something shift in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe.
or vindication.
Or the strange satisfaction that came from knowing that 20 years of 18-hour days and sacrificed weekends and decisions that prioritized growth over comfort had culminated in something that mattered beyond profit margins. He typed a response. Dr. Roberts, your complaint was case number 847 in the database I reviewed, marked as customer service issue resolved, despite no evidence of investigation or contact. You'll receive formal apology from Skybridge within 30 days as part of third-party audit. Compensation package to follow. And if you're willing, I'd like to include your story in the public dashboard we're building. Anonymous, if you prefer. Attributed, if you're comfortable. The system failed you. We're making sure it can't fail anyone else the same way. Marcus Bennett. He hit send and set the phone on his desk, screen down, committing to ignoring whatever responses might arrive. Tomorrow would bring the interview, the press conference planning, the inevitable media cycle that would dissect every aspect of this story until the next controversy captured America's fractured attention. But tonight belonged to the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Emma slept upstairs in a house paid for by companies Marcus had built, that pancakes had been eaten and homework completed and bedtime stories read, that somewhere in America, a trauma surgeon who'd been treated like a problem had received a message acknowledging her dignity, that 2,000 passengers who'd filed complaints into a void would see their experiences validated and compensated. Power, Marcus had learned, wasn't just about freezing aircraft or restructuring corporations. It was about choosing which battles to fight and how to fight them. It was about standing in an aisle and saying, "This is my seat," with enough conviction that the entire system had to recalibrate around that simple assertion of rights. His mother had told him years ago in that hospital room with machines beeping and morphine dripping through IV lines that dignity wasn't given. It was claimed. And once claimed, it became something no one could take away without revealing their own smallness in the process. Rachel Morrison had tried. Captain David Thompson had tried. A system built on buried complaints and elite prioritization had tried. They'd all failed. Because Marcus Bennett had learned long ago that the quietest power was often the most devastating. That staying calm while everyone else panicked was its own form of dominance. That sometimes the most radical act was simply refusing to move from a seat you'd paid for and earned and had every legal and moral right to occupy. He stood from his desk, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to check on Emma one final time before bed. She slept soundly, elephant clutched tight, breathing the deep, steady rhythm of someone who believed the world was fundamentally fair because her father had spent 9 years making it so within the boundaries of their home. Tomorrow he'd make it fairer beyond those boundaries, one airline at a time, one transparency protocol at a time, one refusal to accept injustice as inevitable at a time. But tonight, he was just a father who'd kept his promise about pancakes. And that was enough.